RUSI New South Wales is an independent, apolitical, not-for-profit public education institute that, since 1888, has been promoting informed debate on and enhancing public awareness and understanding of defence and national security issues. We are Australia's oldest think tank. We conduct monthly lectures and seminars, issue a monthly newsletter, provide research support through our extensive military and historical library located in the Anzac Memorial in Sydney's Hyde Park, and together with RUSI Australia, publish a national quarterly magazine called United Service, with informed articles addressing the latest defence and security issues.
Please note, this monthly update presents the geostrategic situation as at the 9th of December 2025. Please be aware that these reports are time-sensitive as these are rapidly changing events. Australia-Indonesia Treaty on Common Security by David Leece. Australia's Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and Indonesia's President, Prabowo Subianto, met in Sydney on the 12th of November during the latter's state visit to Australia, and agreed to a new bilateral treaty on common security. The treaty is modelled closely on the agreement on maintaining security agreed to by Prime Minister Keating and President Suharto on the 18th of December 1995, but abrogated by President Habibie during Australia's intervention in East Timor in September 1999. The new treaty will reflect the close friendship, partnership, and deep trust between Australia and Indonesia under the existing Comprehensive Strategic Partnership 2025-2029. The treaty will commit the parties to undertake to consult at leader and ministerial level on a regular basis about matters affecting their common security, and to develop such cooperation as would benefit their own security and that of the region. Undertake to consult each other in the case of adverse challenges to either party or to their common security interests and, if appropriate, consider measures which might be taken either individually or jointly and in accordance with the processes of each party, and agree to promote, in accordance with the policies and priorities of each, mutually beneficial cooperative activities in the security field, in areas to be identified by the two parties. The treaty will be a significant extension of existing security and defence cooperation between Australia and Indonesia. It builds on the 2006 Lombok Treaty, expanded in 2014, and the 2024 Australia-Indonesia Defence Cooperation Agreement. It will set out in formal terms the two nations' common interest in the peace and security of the region, and their commitment to work together to support the security of the region. Following each country's respective ratification processes, the leaders look forward to signing the treaty in the new year. Observers generally see securing Prabowo's agreement to the new treaty as a significant diplomatic win for the Albanese government. While the proposed treaty is not a defence pact such as the 2025 PNG-Australia Mutual Defence Treaty, PUK Treaty, it is seen as the next best thing. It builds on and strengthens Australia's existing defence arrangements in the Indonesian-Melanesian archipelago and wider Pacific region. The 2025 PNG-Australia Mutual Defence Treaty, PUK Treaty, signed in October, however, stirred anxieties in Jakarta. As a result, the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, James Marape, proposed annual tripartite defence ministers' meetings to build trust and boost military cooperation. The first such Australia, Papua New Guinea and Indonesia annual defence ministers' meeting was held in Port Moresby on the 3rd of December. Inter alia, Papua New Guinea proposed the establishment of a new 10 km buffer zone along the PNG-Indonesia border, which military and government forces would be banned from entering. Once in place, PNG and Indonesia would establish joint patrol posts along the border from which their forces would patrol the buffer zone together. Russo-Ukrainian War by David Leece. The Russo-Ukrainian War has been ongoing at various levels of intensity for over 11 years, and we are now 9 months into the 4th year of continuous heavy fighting since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The principal diplomatic development over the past month has been President Trump's peace proposals. They follow his imposition of sanctions on the 23rd of October on two of Russia's largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, that help fund the Kremlin's war machine. Concurrently, on the battlefield, Russia claimed on the 21st of November to have captured Kupiansk and to have Pokrovsk and Vovchansk largely under Russian control. Ukraine, however, rejected these claims. It insisted that the three key cities remained under Kiev's authority, and warned that fierce fighting continues across the entire northeastern axis. Considering the diplomatic developments first, on the 20th of November, a new United States proposal to end the war was published, leaked to Axios. The plan had 28 provisions which address most of Russia's underlying concerns, and otherwise largely accepted the status quo on the battlefield, i.e. Russia's aggression would be rewarded. Indeed, it was almost universally seen as delivering Russian President Vladimir Putin everything he has always wanted, with very few real concessions in return. It emerged 6 days later that the plan drew from an unofficial Russian-authored paper submitted to the Trump administration in mid-October. Following its publication, President Putin said the US 28-point plan was a basis for peace, and President Zelensky said he was prepared to consider it. Trump put Zelensky under great pressure to accept the deal by the 27th of November or lose access to US intelligence, war material, and other support. Zelensky told the Ukrainian people on the 21st of November that Ukraine may face a very difficult choice, either the loss of dignity or the risk of losing a key partner. Following strong pushback against the 28-point peace plan by European leaders and some US lawmakers, both Republican and Democrat, Trump began referring to the US 28-point plan as a draft. Then, on the 23rd of November, US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, held negotiations on the draft plan in Geneva, Switzerland, with European and Ukrainian officials. This led to a revised 19-point plan which Trump directed his officials to put to both Russia and Ukraine. A flurry of diplomatic activity followed. Of probably most importance was a meeting between Putin and US Special Envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, in Moscow on the 2nd of December. Putin rejected the 19-point plan. Discussion focused on issues to be resolved, rather than any specific wording. No breakthroughs were made. There are a number of sticking points, none more significant than territory. Putin wants all of the Donbass industrial region, which consists of the Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts, plus Crimea, and a broad land bridge through the Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts along the north shore of the Sea of Azov, linking Russia and the Donbass to Crimea. Putin's forces now occupy most of this territory, save for a vital part of western Donetsk, namely the so-called Donetsk fortress belt of cities and towns north of Pokrovsk, which runs in a 50 km north-south line along the H20 Kostiantynivka-Sloviansk highway. Analysts suggest that to seize the fortress belt could take the Russians several years. In exchange for a ceasefire, Putin wants Ukraine to abandon the fortress belt and to retire west to the Donetsk border. The 28-point plan envisaged that this territory would be recognized as de facto Russian, but would be managed as a demilitarized zone. Russia currently occupies some 19% of Ukraine. Zelensky is bound by the Ukrainian constitution to not concede any territory to Russia, but has noted on occasion that some pragmatism may be necessary to secure peace. That said, withdrawing from the Donetsk fortress belt and the unoccupied area of Donetsk as Putin seeks, territory Putin has been unable to seize militarily to date, would seem a strategic mistake. Whether the area became a demilitarized zone or not, the one natural and fortified barrier to any future Russian invasion would have been conceded. I cannot see Ukraine making such a concession. The other major sticking points in the 28-point plan devolve on Ukraine's future security following any ceasefire. One sticking point is the proposal to cap the size of the Ukrainian army at 600,000 personnel. The army is currently around 900,000 and has been up to 1 million strong. Another sticking point is the proposal to not allow NATO forces to be stationed in Ukraine, whereas Europe's coalition of the willing envisages stationing NATO assurance forces in Ukraine following any ceasefire. Further, the 28-point plan would preclude Ukraine from joining NATO at some future time, something Ukraine wishes to do as soon as possible. These, among several other sticking points, seem unbridgeable. After the 2nd of December Moscow meeting, a Kremlin aide, Yuri Ushakov, said a compromise to the territorial issue had not been found and an end to the war is no closer. He was undoubtedly correct. Meanwhile, Putin says he is happy to continue the fighting. If he is not given the rest of Donetsk through negotiation, then he will take it by force. On the 3rd of December, footage emerged showing Russian troops raising the Russian flag over Pokrovsk as Russia claimed full control of the city. But Ukraine insisted that it still holds the north, is hitting back in the south, and has secured key logistics routes to Pokrovsk as fighting continues. Nevertheless, the 18-month battle for Pokrovsk, which provides right flank protection for the Donetsk fortress belt, now seems to have entered its endgame. Accompanying the slow grind on the battlefield, Putin is continuing his nightly drone and missile intimidatory and harassing attacks on Ukrainian cities and vital infrastructure. Typical was the drone and missile strike on Kiev on the night of the 14th of November, which killed 6 people, started fires, and scattered debris. A pregnant woman was among the 35 people injured. Similarly, on the 6th of December, Russia launched some 650 drones and 50 missiles at key Ukrainian power plants, vital for the population as it prepares for a cold winter. Nevertheless, Putin's economic and manpower problems persist. Despite the objection of targeted nations, Putin has ramped up recruitment of foreign fighters through a targeted social media campaign, offering citizenship and money to those who join Russia's fight in Ukraine. The promise of roles away from the front line are aimed at enticing people to sign up, but experts say it is deception. Separately, action is being taken by Ukraine's Western allies to increase the economic pressure on Moscow, especially by sanctioning Russia's shadow fleet, the oil tankers under neutral flags which carry Russian oil to foreign refineries that, in turn, on-sell the refined product to Western nations, such as Australia, thereby effectively bypassing the Western sanctions on Russian oil. In Australia's case, the Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA, an independent European research body, estimates that Australia imported $3.8 billion of oil refined from Russian crude between February 2023 and June 2025, generating $2 billion in tax revenue for the Kremlin. This effectively is support for Russia's war effort, and it exceeds in value the support Australia has given to Ukraine so far. In response to these revelations, Australia has sanctioned a further 45 shadow fleet tankers, but has stopped short of the action against third-party refiners which Europe and Britain are taking from January 2026. That said, Reliance Industries, perhaps the largest supplier of refined Russian crude to Australia, recently announced that it would stop taking Russian crude at its Jamnagar export refinery in India, and it would stop using Russian crude to make the petrol and diesel it sells to Australia. India, though, is maintaining its strong economic and defence relationship with Russia. President Putin visited New Delhi on the 5th of June-December and offered Prime Minister Narendra Modi an uninterrupted supply of fuel. Deals on energy, agriculture, and labour also were signed during a two-day summit. India, however, appeared cautious about the uninterrupted fuel supplies offered due to the Trump administration's ongoing high tariffs on Indian goods sold to the US so long as India continues to buy Russian oil. Australia also announced on the 3rd of December that it is considering a Ukrainian request to donate to Ukraine its 22 European-built Tiger armed reconnaissance helicopters which are being retired. Australia also will provide an additional $95 million in military assistance to Ukraine, which will bring Canberra's total defence support for Ukraine to $1.7 billion since Moscow's full-scale invasion began in February 2022. Under the new package, Australia and New Zealand will become the first non-NATO countries to contribute to the Prioritised Ukraine Requirements List, PEARL, a NATO-coordinated mechanism that streamlines the delivery of military assistance to Kiev and purchases arms for Ukraine from the US. AUKUS and the Australia-United States Alliance by David Leece. The United States Department of War report on its review of the AUKUS agreement has been finalised. Apparently, the draft report was quite critical in tone, reflecting ongoing scepticism within the department, and had to be rewritten to conform with President Donald Trump's enthusiasm for the agreement. The revised report has been provided to Australia, the White House and members of the US Congressional Armed Services Committees. The Pentagon does not intend to make the report public. The review was led by the Undersecretary for Defense Policy, Elbridge Colby, who fears that the agreement will sacrifice US nuclear-powered submarines with no guarantee about how they would be used in a conflict with China. It is understood that the report endorses the concept of AUKUS while recommending changes to put it on its strongest possible footing. The report affirms the existing AUKUS timeline, including the sale of 3 Virginia-class submarines to Australia beginning in 2032, and concludes that maintaining disciplined adherence to this timeline is paramount. This reflects concerns that the US is not producing sufficient submarines to honour its commitment to Australia, and that Australia has not developed the workforce and skills to manage a nuclear submarine program. The rate of Virginia-class submarine production remains at about 1.2 boats per year, well below the 2.3 boats per year needed for the US to fulfill its AUKUS commitment. Also, expanding the submarine workforce, supply chain, and production facilities is critical to meet the US' own fleet needs and those of Australia. Venezuela and the United States War on Drugs by David Leece. United States President Donald Trump has long held an antipathy for Venezuela's left-wing president, Nicolas Maduro Moros, such that his current interest in Venezuela could be seen as unfinished business from his first presidential term. His focus this year has been on drug trafficking between Venezuela and the US, but most observers see his underlying concern is to achieve regime change in Venezuela. Since in late August, Trump has assembled a large naval task force in the southern Caribbean. Initially, It was based on the amphibious assault ship, the USS Iwo Jima, and its amphibious ready group. In November, the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group also deployed to the area. It is now the largest U.S. naval deployment to the Caribbean and Central America in decades. So far, the focus has been on airstrikes on small high-speed vessels in international waters which intelligence indicates may be carrying drugs en route from Venezuela to the United States. The first strike was on the 2nd of September when a 4-engine speedboat heading for Suriname and allegedly carrying 11 Tren de Aragua gang members transporting illegal drugs was sunk. Later strikes also were on vessels operated by the Colombian National Liberation Army and the Dominican Navy, the latter engaged in recovering drugs from one of the destroyed vessels. Initially, these strikes were confined to vessels in the Caribbean, but more recent strikes have also been carried out in the Pacific. As of the 7th of December, a further 21 boats had been destroyed, killing at least 82 alleged drug smugglers or narco-terrorists, as President Trump prefers to call them. On the 13th of November, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced Operation Southern Spear would begin later in November. It would employ robotics and autonomous systems to target Latin American drug trafficking, including by the Cartel of the Suns, which was designated a foreign terrorist organization. On the 1st of December, President Trump declared via social media that the airspace over Venezuela should be considered closed. There are concerns now that Trump will escalate the standoff further by ordering airstrikes on Venezuela itself. There has been much concern in the United States and elsewhere as to the legality of these operations. Drug trafficking is normally considered a civil policing matter, not a military one. Further, the strikes on alleged narco-terrorist vessels in international waters may breach several international laws and conventions, and one country cannot close another country's airspace. One report of a second strike on a vessel where the first strike had resulted in 2 defenseless survivors, the strike of the 2nd of September, is now subject to several inquiries in the U.S. Congress and elsewhere. Afghanistan-Pakistan border conflict by David Deasey. On December 5th, after some weeks of relative quiet on the border, significant clashes occurred between Afghanistan and Pakistan. 5 Afghan civilians were reported killed while 5 were wounded. 3 civilians were injured on the Pakistan side of the border. These clashes occurred despite ongoing peace negotiations. Each side has blamed the other. Afghan border police claim that Pakistani forces threw a hand grenade into the Spinbola border crossing and that Afghan forces responded. They claim that firing continued from the Pakistani side into the early hours of Saturday morning. Pakistani sources, however, claimed that the firing started from the Afghan side and that Pakistani forces returned fire near the Chaman border crossing. Both sides state that they fully committed to the peace talks which are ongoing. In another incident, Pakistan's military also announced that they had killed 9 Pakistan Taliban militants during raids in the Tank and Laki Marwat districts in the vicinity of the Khyber Pass. Meanwhile, the Pakistan Chief of Army, Field Marshal Asim Munir, was appointed on the 4th of December as Pakistan's first Chief of Defence Forces, CDF, with the previous position of Chairman of the Chiefs of Staff being abolished. Previously, under the 27th Amendment to the Pakistani Constitution, which was enacted in November, the holder of the rank of Field Marshal was granted lifelong legal immunity for any actions that he might carry out in office. This makes Munir effectively the most important person in Pakistan and a holder of essentially unfettered power. Part 2. Middle East. Israel-Gaza War by David Leece. You will recall that on the 8th of October, President Trump announced that Israel and Hamas had agreed to the first phase of a peace framework that aimed at a Gaza ceasefire and the release of Israeli captives and Palestinian prisoners. Israel would withdraw its troops to an agreed-upon line beyond the main cities. This would facilitate the release of hostages. The ceasefire came into effect on the 10th of October and Israeli forces withdrew from the main population centers in western Gaza to the Yellow Line, from which Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the IDF would not withdraw further until Hamas disarms. The partial Israeli withdrawal enabled the exchange of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners to proceed. Under the first phase of the agreement, Hamas was to return, within 72 hours, the 20 living and 28 dead Israeli and foreign hostages it was holding. All the living Israeli hostages were released on the 13th of October in exchange for 250 Palestinian prisoners and 1718 detainees from Gaza. The return of the bodies of the dead hostages, however, was drawn out as many were difficult to find under the rubble as expected. As at the 3rd of December 2025, all but one of the hostages had been returned to Israel. The remains of Ran Gvili, a 24-year-old police officer killed on the 7th of October 2023, are yet to be found under the rubble. A lack of DNA kits is hampering the identification of human remains when found. Of the original 251 hostages captured by Hamas or its associates on the 7th of October, 2023, 168 hostages survived and have been returned to Israel. The remaining 83 hostages died in Gaza, and their bodies, except for that of Rangvili, have now been returned to Israel. With Israel unwilling to recommence negotiations until all bodies are returned, there's been no progress yet on the second phase of President Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan. This includes plans for the governance of Gaza, the withdrawal of Israeli troops, the disarmament of Hamas, and reconstruction. That, however, may be about to change, as I will describe later. Meanwhile, notwithstanding that its senior leadership has been decimated and its combat forces severely weakened, Hamas in the Gaza Strip remains far from beaten. As soon as the IDF withdrew behind the Yellow Line, Hamas took firm control of the vacated territory, moving uniformed and armed police onto the streets. It rounded up leaders of Palestinian rebel groups opposed to Hamas, whom it accused of cooperating with Israel, and publicly executed them. The ceasefire, itself, remains very shaky. At times, it has been honoured, especially by Israel, more in the breach than the observance, but President Trump insists that it is holding and will hold. Trump said on the 30th of October that, under the agreement, Israel is entitled to respond to ceasefire breaches by Palestinians, whether or not those Palestinians are under Hamas control. Some breaches have been by rogue elements of Hamas, and others have occurred behind the Yellow Line in areas under IDF control. Apparently, some breaches have been by Palestinians who have taken exception to Israeli bulldozers destroying infrastructure and have killed IDF soldiers in an attempt to stop the destruction. When Israeli soldiers have been killed, the IDF invariably has responded with overwhelming force across the whole enclave. On other occasions, the IDF has identified suspected Hamas leaders and has chosen to assassinate them with a broadsword-like air or artillery strike in preference to a rapier-like sniper's bullet. No matter how well targeted, the broadsword approach inevitably is accompanied by considerable collateral damage, including unintended casualties. As of the 19th of November 2025, over 72,500 people, 70,525 Palestinians and 2,109 Israelis have been reported killed in Gaza, according to the Gaza Health Ministry and the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including 248 journalists and media workers, 120 academics, and over 224 humanitarian aid workers, a number that includes 179 employees of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, which has coordinated aid in the Gaza Strip since 1949. Since the ceasefire, Israel has handed back responsibility for aid distribution to UNRWA and the civil society aid groups that have been working in Gaza for many years. The US and Israel-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GDF, said on the 24th of November that it would wind down in the Gaza Strip after operating there for almost 6 months. It was, in effect, a failed experiment. The organization had already suspended its 3 food distribution sites in Gaza after the ceasefire took effect on the 10th of October. The GHF was set up by Israel and the US to bypass the traditional aid system run by UNRWA. The UN and other aid agencies refused to cooperate with its system, saying it was unethical and unsafe. Hundreds of Palestinians were killed while seeking food amid chaotic scenes near GHF sites, mostly by Israeli fire. Israel said its troops fired warning shots. On the 7th of December, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Israel and Hamas are very shortly expected to move into the second phase of the ceasefire, once Hamas returns the remains of Rangvili, the last hostage held in Gaza. The return of Gvili's remains, and Israel's return of 15 bodies of Palestinians in exchange, would complete the first phase of Trump's 20-point ceasefire plan. Netanyahu said that negotiations on the ceasefire's second phase could begin as soon as the end of the month. The second phase includes the disarming of Hamas, the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, the deployment of an international force to secure Gaza, and the formation of a temporary Palestinian government to run day-to-day affairs under the supervision of an international board led by US President Donald Trump. A senior Hamas official told the Associated Press on the 7th of December that the group is ready to discuss freezing or storing or laying down its weapons as part of the ceasefire in a possible approach to one of the most difficult issues ahead. Notwithstanding this concession by Hamas, negotiating the next stage, including the disarmament of Hamas and its replacement in Gaza by an interim civil administration, are likely to be more challenging than the agreements so far reached. Many experts say President Trump will be critical in ensuring that Israel remains committed to implementing the full deal. A two-state solution, though, is still widely considered well out of reach for now. Israel-Lebanon ceasefire breaches by David Leece. Many observers point to the continued Israeli attacks in Lebanon since a ceasefire was agreed with Hezbollah and the Lebanese government in November 2024 as an example of how Israel would look to handle the ceasefire in Gaza. It is instructive to look closer at it. Over the past year in Lebanon, the ceasefire has been honoured more in the breach than the observance, especially by Israel. For example, on the 24th of September, the IDF carried out an attack on a Hezbollah stronghold in southern Beirut, killing Ibrahim Quaisi, head of Hezbollah's missile corps. Then, on the 7th of November 2025, the IDF carried out heavy airstrikes on several locations in southern Lebanon, saying with some justification that Hezbollah was trying to rebuild its military capabilities there contrary to the terms of the ceasefire. Under the terms of the November 2024 ceasefire, the Lebanese Armed Forces, LAF, the country's official military, is supposed to be the only group bearing weapons. It has been clearing Hezbollah positions in the border region and seizing weapons, saying it has seized thousands of rockets and missiles and removed large amounts of unexploded ordnance. But the LAF has admitted it will not enter private homes, where Israel alleges weapons are often stored, for fear of aggravating the population. The people in the south have been supporting resistance to Israel since 1948 and are likely to keep doing so. That leaves the LAF and the government trapped between the demands to disarm Hezbollah and fear of provoking sectarian conflict by forcibly doing so. They particularly wish to avoid sectarian conflict in the streets of southern Beirut, a Hezbollah stronghold. This reflects the weakness of the Lebanese government and the residual strength of Hezbollah, despite the decimation of its leadership by Israel during the recent war. Israel's ongoing interventions are an inevitable consequence of this situation. According to the UN Human Rights Office, Israeli strikes have killed at least 127 civilians in the 12 months since the ceasefire, including 11 children in a Palestinian refugee camp near the city of Sidon. On the 5th of December, Israeli government spokeswoman Shosh Bedrosian said, "The State of Israel will continue to insist on the full enforcement of the ceasefire in Lebanon to ensure that this terror group is completely cut off, they're not rearming, that there's no threat to the State of Israel, its citizens, and our security forces as well." Israel-Syria border tensions by David Leece. Syria's current provisional government, the Syrian Transitional Government, was officially formed and sworn in on the 29th of March 2025 by President Ahmed al-Shara following the collapse of the Assad regime in December 2024. It succeeded the earlier Syrian caretaker government. Israel has been reluctant to welcome the new government as it is composed of persons whom it formerly regarded as enemies, regardless of their current protestations. In the confusion following Assad's overthrow, Israel expanded its border buffer into southwest Syria, and Israel has continued to hold that Syrian territory since then. The area is known as the buffer zone or area of separation. Israel also has launched several airstrikes on Damascus and other cities over the past year. Tensions increased in late November when the IDF conducted a raid into southwestern Syria. Syrian state media reported at least 13 Syrians were killed in the attack in Beit Jin, including women and children, while Israeli authorities said it was targeting terrorists from the Lebanese militant group Jamaat-e-Islamiyah. Several IDF troops also were injured. Benjamin Netanyahu is now demanding that Syria establish a demilitarized zone between the border with the Israeli-annexed Golan Heights and capital Damascus, as part of any possible peace deal with the new Syrian government. The United States, however, is a strong supporter of the new Syrian regime. On the 1st of December, President Trump posted on his Truth Social platform, "It is very important that Israel maintain a strong and true dialogue with Syria, and that nothing takes place that will interfere with Syria's evolution into a prosperous state." Netanyahu responded on the 2nd of December saying that Israel expects Syria to establish a demilitarized buffer zone from Damascus to the buffer zone area, including, of course, the approaches to Mount Hermon and the summit of Mount Hermon. "We hold these territories to ensure the security of the citizens of Israel, and that is what obligates us. In a good spirit and understanding of these principles, it is also possible to reach an agreement with the Syrians, but we will stand by our principles in any case." The Situation in Yemen by David Deasey. There have been no new attacks on shipping for the last month. Rather, there have been some significant developments on land which do not involve the Houthis. Until recently, politically, Yemen had been divided between the Houthi administration aligned with Iran in the north based on Sana'a, the largest city in Yemen and the former capital of the united country, and the Aden-based official government of Yemen. The official government is recognized internationally and had been backed by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. South Yemen was once an independent country from the time of the British withdrawal in 1967 until the whole of Yemen was unified in 1990. Following the Houthi insurgency which split off the northern section of the country leading to the intervention in the war by Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the south of Yemen had been overseen by the Presidential Leadership Council, an executive which initially had support from both the Saudis and the Emiratis. In recent days, however, the Southern Transitional Council, STC, a UAE-backed separatist movement, has made huge military advances. It has launched a military offensive in the Hadramaut area, seizing the major city of Sayoun. The area, although previously aligned with the central government, had been under the control of the Hadramaut Tribal Alliance, a Saudi-backed tribal group. This operation was condemned by the HTA leader, Sheikh Amr bin Habrish, who spoke out against the STC and its goal of independence for southern Yemen. The STC claimed it was acting as the area had become a hotbed of terrorist activity supporting the Houthis, ISIS, and Iran-backed groups. It is clear that Hadramaut, which makes up about one-third of Yemeni territory and holds 80% of the country's modest oil reserves, is now effectively in STC hands. There were some fears that this development might lead to a clash between Saudi and Emirati forces, but that appears to have been averted, at least for the time being. The tribal alliance has agreed to withdraw from the oil facilities that it was occupying in an agreement supervised by the Saudis. Although the story was given that the STC was moving to ensure that the area was secure from terrorism, separatist South Yemen flags are flying and the old Yemeni flags have disappeared. The STC forces appear to have received Chinese AT-4 155mm howitzers and UAE-built light armoured vehicles from the Emiratis. Presumably, these have come with training and support. Some Yemeni government forces appear to have joined the rebels. The situation remains confused, with a senior member of the official government, Major General Faraj Salmin al-Bassani, seeming to support the operations of STC forces. The Al-Hammoum tribes issued an official statement on the 4th of December, affirming their unwavering support for Sheikh Amr bin Habrish and also declared a full disavowal of Faraj Salmin al-Bassani, stating that he does not represent the tribe nor reflect its political or social orientations. Confusion reigns. Given that the United States seems to tacitly support the current Aden-based government, it is not clear yet whether the agenda is separatist or an internal power struggle. In any event, the UAE currently seems to emerge the ultimate winner. Will Yemen end being divided into 3 sections? How this might affect anti-Houthi operations is not yet clear. Civil War in Sudan by David Leece. You will recall that on the 26th of October, the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, under the command of General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemedti, finally captured El Fasher after an 18-month siege. El Fasher, the capital of Sudan's North Darfur province, up to that point, was the only city in the Darfur region still in the hands of the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, commanded by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. Following the capture of El Fasher, a massacre of civilians, especially Africans, followed. Some observers were equating it with the 1994 Rwandan genocide. It is estimated that 100,000 people fled the city for the safety of Tawila, 65 kilometers across the desert to the west, but only 10,000 reached Tawila. Tawila is controlled by an armed group that so far has kept out of the civil war. On the 24th of November, the RSF announced an apparently unilateral 3-month humanitarian truce. General Dagalo made the announcement in a recorded address. SAF General al-Burhan did not immediately confirm that any agreement had been reached. In fact, the night before, al-Burhan had rejected a ceasefire proposal put forward by the so-called Quad, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and the United States. He took particular issue with the presence in the grouping of the UAE, which has long rejected accusations that it is arming and funding the RSF. In his 24th of November announcement, General Dagalo said the RSF agreed to the truce in cooperation with the Quad, the African Union and the Regional Intergovernmental Authority on Development Bloc and sought to enhance civilian protections and facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid. General Dagalo called the unilateral pause the first step in reaching a political solution to the fighting. He added that the RSF had approved creating a field to holding those who have committed violations against civilians accountable. By the 8th of December, however, regardless of any truce, it was reported that the fighting has spread to the neighbouring Kordofan region, which abuts Darfur to its east. Hay fighting was reported from key centres in the north, west and south of Kordofan, an oil-rich region, important to the economies of both sides should Sudan be divided into a West Sudan and an East Sudan as some have proposed. Indeed, the civil war has now reached an uneasy stalemate. The SAF is unlikely to defeat the RSF outright. The RSF continues to maintain strong control over more than a quarter of the country, especially in the Darfur region and southwestern Sudan, and as an RSF attack in Port Sudan on the 4th of May shows, the RSF can strike the SAF in its previously secure heartland in the country's northeast. As to the humanitarian situation, the United Nations top human rights official warns of another wave of atrocities, this time in Kordofan. The death toll since the war began on the 15th of April, 2023 is now estimated to possibly be as high as 400,000, and pockets of famine remain, especially in Darfur.